using a search function with those 3 words, determine exactly what is required by the audience and how then I need to organize my responses to ensure that they get what they want, because often they have a checkbox grid on the other side that they have to compare what you're presenting to a very much a standard that they have in the background. And all you typically have to do to get through this first gate of getting a connection point to that audience is ensuring that you can answer anything that says must, shall, or will within the document. And we'll talk a bit about some of the power of whether it's AI or other elements later, in the fact that there is now technologies that can help you with your Control F search to some extent, but these are still developing or maturing on the way through. So I want to stop there, and I'm just going to check with the chat function. And I would like to also ensure that, oh, and then we actually, okay, thank you for putting that in. So what I'd like to do at this point, actually, just given that we do have a bit of limited time, is I'd love to hand it over to Rylan Brennan and Sarah Montour for some comments on their side, but also recognizing the power of this network that we have in front of us, that if other folks would like to throw in some of those elements that they're seeing in their experiences or places they've tripped up, I would really also appreciate hearing from others. But maybe over to Rylan and Sarah to start.
Yeah, thank you very much, John, and thank you to Sarah Lacey for adding will and should include as other mandatory criteria. And to John's point, particularly on requests for proposals, there'll be the mandatory rated criteria you'll see in the technical rated criteria, and that's the grids boxes that that John was referring to, and ensuring you're aligning with those is really important. For Sarah, there's a few questions here too that I'm sure Sarah and John could answer. And I think it comes down to, and John's talked about, how to understand breaking down the information when responding to a grant on RFP. But let's talk about what it comes to what types of writing processes and documents should people be most familiar with, and how do you describe the writing process to someone who's new to it? So let's say we're brand new to the topic, Sarah. What is your process that you go about when you're looking to do some writing, whether it's for a grant or an RFP or doing a business plan? Oh, sorry, Sarah, you're just on mute still.
Hi, good day. I'm saying good day because we're spread across time zones. I am Sarah Montour. I'm Candu's procurement navigator, which means I help build a bridge between EDOs, Indigenous businesses, community-based businesses, and industry, whether it's federal government or corporate Canada. But I'm really there to make that connection and to help you navigate those sometimes tricky waters. So good question, Ryland. And I also do want to acknowledge that I am Mohawk from Six Nations of the Grand River Territory in Southern Ontario, which I am fortunate enough to still be able to live and work within my home community. So I did make some notes, and Ryland, that your question, you couldn't have wrote it better in terms of what I wanted to say. Bid documents are usually very long and very specific, which can be a con, but it can also be a really positive thing too, in that it is very specific. So it eliminates that guesswork. The documents tell you exactly what you must say, not should say, not maybe say, but what you must say, all going back to those mandatory and technical requirements. And they also clearly spell out how you're going to be evaluated. So here is my kind of hack for you. Now, I'm a printer. I like paper documents in front of me, but I know that not everybody is that way. So whether you're printing or you're reading on screen, I suggest that you highlight all the sections. And then as you're writing your documents, do it section by section. And once you think you have everything written, I want you to go back to those sections that you've highlighted and physically, whether it's on screen or on paper, put a check mark that you have that section. That really helps you stay on task and make sure that you have that information that is required. So physically checking off and making sure section by section that everything that should be or must be included is there. So, you know, it's really important that you have all of that information. And the other tip that I want to make sure that gets out is, remember that if you don't say it, if you don't include it, you cannot be evaluated. So even if you've done work for this department or this company a million times, and it feels like maybe this is just like an exercise in futility because you've done work with them so many times, they cannot give you credit for anything unless it is in that bid document. So, you know, referring to a website, sorry about that. Referring to a website or telling them to look here for more information, that's not going to work. It must be included. So, you know, those are my tips and tricks. And just to let you know that we do have a procurement mentoring program, and we actually, half of the 10-week sessions are pretty much spent on bid submissions. So we really take some time to help you with that technical writing and to take you through what a good bid submission looks like.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that insight, Sarah. Sharing, you know, the process that I use in my day-to-day work. Most of my time is spent writing proposals or reviewing proposals, and over the past decade of my career on the corporate side of things, it was also reviewing them and evaluating them. And everything that John and Sarah has said here today is true. I typically break down my process into 6 stages. The first stage is just researching and preparing. So to both John and Sarah's point, making sure I understand all the musts, all the wills, all the shoulds, and making sure I've got all the right documents to inform what it is I need to talk about. The next thing that I'll typically do too, especially if I'm doing a grant proposal, if I'm writing a grant, or if I'm looking for something like community investment dollars, or trying to add what's called a value-added component to a proposal. So I'm going to respond to the RFP, but let me tell you why my business is going to be better than all the rest, or why the community I'm representing or working for is better than all the rest. And what you do is you do the research on who the end client is and what they've celebrated. What do they think good looks like? And how can you replicate that or give them a similar success story that they can feature or highlight by doing the work and by winning the project? So once you've done your research, once you've prepared, typically what I then do is I outline the document just to make sure that all the mandatories are there on the page. So that way it's at least in the document and I can reference back to it and write it out. And then I just start drafting. I often find that this is the most difficult process if it's responding to an RFP or writing a grant or a business plan from scratch. And to be honest with everyone on the call here, I struggle when the page is blank. And that's such a hard barrier to get over sometimes. And so what I'll often do is I'll put on talk to text in Microsoft Word, and I'll just do a dictation and a mind dump. I'll write questions into the document to ask myself, to prompt and just get the content out, get it flowing, and get the ideas formed. Once everything is kind of there, then I go into the review and revise phase and make sure that everything makes sense. I read through the document to ensure that, again, everything is in one voice and is uniform. If we're using technical terms, making sure that everything is defined. If we are using TLAs, 3-letter acronyms, things like that, that they're clearly defined, that the table of contents aligns to all the materials, that my hyperlinks are working. And then I'll finalize and submit according to the guidelines that are stated. So as you know, if you've ever submitted an RFP, typically they'll communicate, you know, what the timeline for submission and the due date is. A tip as well that I'll use and share here, Outlook calendar reminders or whatever it is for you to ensure that you've got enough time and are appropriately submitting and responding to whatever the requirements are, whether it's a submission through Merck's, or whether if it's an email to a government contact for a procurement opportunity through PSPC or to an organization. If they've clearly stated what the time limits are, then make sure that you're making a reminder and that your document is going to be submitted to them by that time. Another note or tip as well is that if you're writing in particular a proposal towards private industry, or if you're writing a grant towards private industry for maybe community sponsorship dollars, sometimes, and I'm not saying this is always the case, but oftentimes, especially in summers, they'll be reviewed by interns or people in very junior positions. So you want to avoid technical jargon unless it's specific. And you also want to ensure that it tells a clear picture of what it is you're going to be adding in terms of value. Because keep in mind, your technical expertise, you know your business, you know what you can offer, you know the event you're going to put on, you know how great it's going to be. But the person on the other side of it, to Sarah's earlier point, if it's not included in your proposal or what you're submitting, it's oftentimes something that they can evaluate you on. Once you've submitted it, even if it's not, and this is another part of the process, even after you've written and everything's pencils down and it's been submitted, even if you don't win the opportunity, or even if you don't receive the grant, follow up and ask questions. Ask where you could improve for the next time. Ask where you felt or they felt that your proposal was strong. Start building a rapport and to better understand the business needs outside of this single opportunity, because you never know what ancillary opportunities might come along or when the next time for business is. So, and that's often a part of the technical writing process that's left out, because people don't think, oh, well, that's not writing. But the reality is, knowing your audience is such a key component to technical writing that to not take advantage of that opportunity for interaction, it's just negligent. And it's something that you can do to ensure that you're writing stronger the next time around. But those are basically the 6 steps. You've got research and prepare, outline the document, start drafting, review and revise, finalize and submit according to the guidelines, and then do a courtesy follow-up after the deadline for submission.
Great, yeah, and thank you, Ryland, for that. And a couple of things that Ryland and Sarah touched on that I think are really important are how to get past the blank sheet of paper, how to get things moving, especially given that a lot of these, whether it's an RFP or it's a grant or contribution, someone sends you something and you're like, oh my God, this thing closes in 2 weeks. What am I going to do? It is actually exactly what we should apply on. It is exactly in the wheelhouse of our organization or our community, and I have no time. And it's kind of like trying to convince yourself to go to the gym or go for a walk or something like that. It's a very similar type of process where you have to get over the initial procrastination or the inertia of not doing something. And Ryland's point about the voice to text, again, like my kids are in school right now and they've struggled in some ways, and the schools now are providing Chromebooks and saying, well, you don't have to write everything initially in your first draft. Get it down so then you can go back and you can write around your words. And that voice to text idea has improved so much in the last couple of years that it can help you beat back some of those timelines or those time pressures that you're facing. And one more thing about the audience before we move to a bit more into technology is when I think about the audience, I always envision the leader of that organization, whether it's a politician or if it's the CEO, standing at a podium announcing my project. And I think about what they are going to say and what is going to make them feel important. And then I try to ensure that that messaging is wrapped around whatever I'm submitting. I basically write the executive summary for any submission as the speech. That's what I do. So I am like sitting back saying, I write everything, I do the proposal, I check all the boxes Sarah talked about and go through that process. I use the steps that Rylan has talked about to kind of get everything moving and to have a systematic approach. And then I come back and I write the speech for an announcement as the executive summary. And when I do that, I know that the audience, the first thing they're going to read is hopefully something that makes them feel excited about my proposal on the way through. And that's kind of how I look at it. But one of the things, maybe shifting gears on this to technology and the concept of things like voice to text or others, is elements like ChatGPT. And there is a huge debate currently around this. It's probably a similar debate that happened when we received computers in school for the first time, or when we started using the internet, in the early 2000s. And is it appropriate? What's happening with it? And I know myself and Ryland have had many conversations about using different technologies on the way through in our processes and how it can be used, but not abused. And what are the correct ways to do some of this? And where I've found elements like ChatGPT, first of all, is not ever putting proprietary information into any outside tool like ChatGPT. So you should never ever be putting things into an outside system that provides proprietary or confidential information from your organization. So I say that right away. The second thing is that I've found that ChatGPT is very good for that getting off the blank piece of paper to provide some guidance or direction on what is most used or what are structures I could use to respond to something when I am not sure where to start. But I would never allow myself to submit something that I pulled directly from something like ChatGPT as a submission. It would never represent myself. It would never represent my organization. And in fact, you could end up in a place where you are misaligning your messaging or your requirement between yourself and your audience, because ChatGPT may act like it knows your audience, but it's really just anticipating what are the next things that should appear in a sentence, or what are the things that are most present based on the body of knowledge it's working off of. And it hasn't matured into a space where it has the capabilities of doing that yet. But we have used ChatGPT to get us started in some of our writing processes. And in fact, it's probably saved us the most time by just making sure that we started. But maybe over to Ryland to start, and maybe for others if they'd like to let us know about their experiences. But I know myself and Ryland have had lots of conversations about this. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you, John. So yeah, and just to focus quickly here on ChatGPT as one example, there are a number of different AI tools that do the natural language generative text. But ChatGPT is one we'll chat about just because it's the most popular one, or it's the one that most people tend to be using these days. As John said, it is at the end of the day an AI language model that is trained on a large body of text from a variety of sources across the internet. And you can self-train it within the certain modules to store information in its memory to try and make it a little more accurate. The transformation algorithm is able to analyze and understand a large amount of data, such as text, and use this to generate text that is similar to human conversation. But that's the thing, is that it just does that kind of predictive language progression. And oftentimes, and I'll share a story here that I had with another client. I was brought in to help review applications for a posting that had gone on with a major corporation, and I started reading through people's resumes in the cover letters, and at about the third letter I noticed a pattern, and that pattern was that all three of these cover letters started with the exact same salutations, the exact same focus on that they're great communicators and they're hard workers, and they've got 10 years experience in this area of business. And wouldn't you know it, that the cover letters for all three of these applicants were the exact same. When we started going through it more, and I ended up having a discussion with the HR lead, is the amount of AI generated resumes and proposals that they're receiving are through the roof, because people are putting way too much trust in the tool. I can speak to it as well from managing other projects. Some of the proposals that I've received, or grant applications I've received in programs I've supported there, all of the responses, because whatever has been plugged in to the ChatGPT model is the RFP package or is the grant application, and then it's the same structure every time, because it's an algorithm. If you pump in the same source document, oftentimes if the memory hasn't been altered at all in the program, directing it one way or another, it'll spit out the same results every time, or something similar every time. And so as a result, when I was reviewing grants applications in the fall of last year, I saw the same pattern again. So again, if you're going to be using this tool, it's a good thing to get things started, or it's good to handle basic tasks. Where I find it most useful is plugging in calendar information. I put my calendar availabilities in and the times, and I ask it to print out windows where I can meet with people for half an hour or 45 minutes to discuss certain things, and it tells me what I need to do. If I need to figure out, where to look for additional information, it's a good glorified Google search tool. But in terms of trusting it to build out an application or to build out a proposal, it's honestly not at the level that it needs to be able to provide that nuance. And if you are using it as the benchmark to, just get words on the paper and get things started, what's important to note is that what you bring with your writing and what you bring in communicating the nuance of what it is that your business or your community or your organization can do, that's where the difference is going to be made. Because right now there are people that are, pulling as many proposals as they can or grant applications as they can, pumping it in ChatGPT, taking whatever it pumps out and submitting it. Where you're really going to shine is when you differentiate yourself from everyone there. And the biggest way you're going to differentiate yourself from everyone there is being authentic and speaking to what it is your business or your organization can offer. So that's where we're kind of at with ChatGPT. The other thing I will say about using it right now, just because it's an important conversation, is on the generative art side of things. uh, Try to ensure that you're not using it to generate art, especially Indigenous themed or Indigenous stylized art. Try and support or use authentic Indigenous art where possible and whenever possible. It's been becoming more and more of an issue that we've seen recently in private industry, especially in some of the spaces I'm supporting there. And that is a feature that ChatGPT has of using different styles of artwork. So just a general reminder too, that when you're using the tool, it can be abused. And if you see others abusing the tool in that way, maybe have a corrective conversation about the harm that they may not realize they're doing when they go to an AI generative tool to try and create a piece of Indigenous inspired or Indigenous looking artwork, rather than going and supporting actual Indigenous artists. Thanks, John.
Yeah, great. Thank you, and especially on that point around art, Ryland, and anything that's intellectual property, is where that's a really important conversation. One piece, Ryland, I may love to hear from you about, and this is something that I've slightly experimented with, but at the same time, is uh, it, you just beat me to it, I think, and with the RFP into ChatGPT and the fact that you can actually have something like ChatGPT analyze a piece of work to give you some direction. And again, I think one of the key elements on this is to make sure that you're using it to create a potential path for yourself, but you're not relying on it. And not even fully relying that the must, shalls, and will be sifted out or mined out of that document. But Ryland, maybe talk a bit about the opportunity for an engine like ChatGPT to put a technical document into it in order to help you read and analyze it.
Absolutely, John. So to the point in the chat there, yeah, it's a great tool to help build that framework and to get that understanding and give you something that you can read through to go, okay, it's saying that for this project, I need to have a project kickoff meeting to align with what the expectations are. That makes sense. Oh, my first step then is, doing a little bit of, research and analysis of what it is the client actually wants here. And let's say it's construction. Okay, maybe I need to do a schedule and need to get involved with ordering the right materials for the job site. And then I need a checklist of what all those materials are that I'll need for the job site and what the order lead times are for those materials. Okay, that all makes sense. So let's say ChatGPT, you put in the RFP and it gives you that framework. That's fantastic. Again, you don't want to be putting proprietary information in there. So you don't want to say, hey, ChatGPT, make sure that we're using, John's lumber for when we're procuring lumber on this project, because, that's your proprietary information on what the preferred supplier you'd be using and bringing forward into it is. The other thing that you want to ensure is that it's right size fit, because sometimes what AI will do is it'll build you out these very elaborate and big frameworks that, again, you're going to have to perform to if that's what you've said in the proposal. So to John's earlier point about ensuring that it is actually what you're writing down and what you're proposing is fit to service. Does this actually meet the need? And you as the subject matter expert are going to know that the most. Sometimes what ChatGPT will propose as frameworks might be the best practices. So they may suggest that, okay, in this project to ensure that delivery is on time and delivered with quality, we're going to do weekly touch base meetings with the client that are going to be established, and we'll be doing meeting summaries after each meeting to ensure that we're staying on task and aligned. The reality is that if the project is only, a month or two, that might not be a best use of your time or the client's time if it's not specified in the RFP. But because it's the best practice from the large language model it's pulled off the internet to ensure that you're meeting regularly to push projects forward, it's going to put that in your framework. So again, it's that reminder to ensure that you take whatever it is that ChatGPT puts it out, review it in a common sense assessment to what it is, the actual ask is, and if what it's proposed as a framework makes sense for what your business or community or organization can deliver to, and then adjust and personalize as appropriate.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. And maybe just with a couple of minutes left, if there's anyone else that would like to share an example or an element, I know Barry's been putting some stuff in the chat as well. Maybe Barry, I don't know if you have a couple of comments you'd like to add in as someone who's been on both sides of this coin. Please feel free. And others, if you have a point, please just let us know or raise your hand.
Thanks, John, because I was just typing and it will take me forever to finish what I was going to say. Two-figure typist. Something I actually like to talk about now that I'm on this side, I kind of been following the RFP process. A lot of what you're talking about was a little bit outside of my space. I was mostly involved in goods, and so that's why I threw in the specs and things like that. Something I actually comes from personal experience is people don't realize RFPs when they put them together, the contracting people, it's put together based on the knowledge they have on hand at the moment or information they've been able to put together. And a good example of this is when I was in the office furniture business, Department of Foreign Affairs in particular. When I first approached them, they didn't know who we were. They actually had a different company, a manufacturer out of the U.S. who was there, held the contract. And we started out slow, like low dollar value, getting into the department. And so over a couple of years, actually 3 years in particular, they got to know we existed. They got to know about our products. They got to know like all about us. And when the RFP came out again for 3 years later, they knew we existed. And when they put the specs out, it was open enough for us to be included to bid. So I always say they don't know what they don't know, right? And that's why it's important, I believe, to I hear these things. Well, the RFP, when it comes out, it's pretty much pigeonholed. Well, it's pigeonholed for the knowledge they have at that moment, right? And or I shouldn't call it that, but typically that's the way it is. So it's important for us to get in way before. Like a way, yeah, we might get lucky and win an RFP on something, but again, if you're in early and develop a relationship for a couple of years and they know about you and your product, then when they do the RFP, they can keep it broad enough and transparent enough that you would have an opportunity. That's so important. And that was kind of the way I did it over all those years, right? DFA was a good example because if I hadn't gone in there and just sold them a chair, I just picked them off the list one day and thought, okay, I'm going to start it. And over the course of 3 years, we were able to learn about the department, learn about the personality, the way they did things, what they wanted to achieve, and then when it came time to bid, they knew the products we were putting in, the desk and stuff, and so they made sure that we were able to bid on it as well. So that's very important, I think, as well. We often forget that an RFP is just, to me, it's like a snapshot in time. And that snapshot comes from information that they've put together. So I think that's important.
Yeah, thank you, Barry, for that. And that's very true. Is that, well, often, in my time working in the space, a lot of these processes, if you're just doing it because it showed up on your desk and it's due in 2 weeks and you just think it's exciting, but you don't really have a long-term strategy or an understanding of why you're going to participate, you can often mismanage your time and you can kind of go in the wrong spots. But to Barry's point, if you have a strategy and if you're whether you're making it up on the fly or whether it's a long-term strategy, it can really work. And for economic development officers, for community-driven organizations, it's understanding where you want to go and where you want to put those efforts, to make sure that if you're going to, work really diligently for 2 to 3 weeks on something, you know what success looks like. Because to Barry's point, maybe success is just getting in the door the first time, while knowing the next time around you have to be more and more prepared. And whether one of the things I've seen as well is that with a lot of the community-based information, maybe 40, maybe 60% of the information you're going to put into future documents is going to be the same. So after you've created these different, Lego blocks of your own perspective, your own community-based information, your own organizational information, you're going to find that these processes become easier as you go, but you have to understand what the initial success would look like, whether it's because you're asking questions, you're doing debriefs, or as Barry's pointed out, that you just start moving in that direction. Go ahead, Barry.
So yeah, John, what I was going to add was, strategy is kind of like your business plan. They kind of go together, right? You really got to look at the long term when you're throwing your hat in for an RFP. But another great thing about RFPs is I would use an RFP to learn about a department or a specific area, let's say. And we'll take office supplies, for example, because I get a lot of people talking about that. In the office supply kind of space, it's not you're not going to get rich in that space, first off. But how would I find that out? Well, I had to throw my hat in the ring, so to speak, and to see how that whole kind of thing worked. If you lose, you can get a debrief. And in my case, I ended up winning a spot, which really kind of shook me because I wasn't prepared. I was just wanting to find out who was in that space. And at the end of about a year and a half, we realized there's only about 3% gross profit. Like, that's pretty hard to keep the lights on. Because there's big companies like the Granite Toys of the world and all those staples. They have a different strategy going in than we would as entrepreneurs. Our strategy is keep the lights on. Their strategy may be just to get in and make money elsewhere. And we did that sometimes in office furniture as well. So there's a whole lot of variables at play. But one of the great things about an RFP is sometimes I would just and I wouldn't spend a lot of time on it, but it'd be a great way to investigate whether the business was there because of the debriefing option. The debriefing option, I cannot stress enough, it's like a college course on how that department does their procurement. So you can learn a lot. Like, you can actually go in and throw your hat in, don't spend a lot of time, ask for a debriefing, and then they'll give you all the pointers about your RFP, and you'll learn, well, maybe at this particular area isn't attractive enough for me in terms of profit, or maybe it is. Maybe there isn't a lot of people in that space. So there's a lot of opportunity. That's kind of what I used to do with RFPs. Like, I won water and medical devices just because I threw my hat in. It was crazy. But then you kind of learn, and you can pick and choose, right? And so there's a lot. The key with an RFP, I think, that a lot of people miss is, like you said, John, the debriefing. Like, to me, if that's the consolation prize to not winning the actual RFP. It really is, because typically, when you get an RFP, the next time you bid, I should say a debriefing, it's your choice whether you want to win or lose. And what I mean by that is you're going to find out about its price. It may have been just that. And a lot of, like I tell people, if you're looking at getting rich in the federal government space, and it's not going to happen, it's probably the most competitive marketplace in the world. But where you can make money is like low dollar value and things like that, or in niche market, like a niche product, that kind of stuff. But again, once you learn the debriefing process from the federal government, it kind of carries over into everything else as well. And I don't, Ryland, I was kind of interesting about you were saying about AI. You know what I use AI for now? It's to give me additional info. It really does. I take all the info wherever I can from everywhere. It's almost like, your little Post-it notes, right? And then you kind of look at them all scrambled all over, and you bring them together, and then you can kind of decide whether you're going to really go forward with it or not. Because I hate when I hear people spend weeks or hours, right?
Barry, I'm going to have to interrupt you.
So that's okay. Yeah, no worries.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
You've got a wealth of experience. And